I'm Nima Rajan. The G7 leaders are holding a virtual meeting today to discuss the crisis in Afghanistan. Justin Trudeau broke away from the ongoing federal election campaign to participate in the talks. But he and the other leaders failed to persuade U.S. President Joe Biden to delay the U.S. military withdrawal from Afghanistan. Meanwhile, military special forces are operating outside the confines of Kabul airport to get people on flights out of Afghanistan. Ottawa is not providing details on exactly what Canada's soldiers are doing. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau says the military is authorized to do what it can to get Canadians and Canada-connected Afghans to safety. Well, this comes as the head of the Canadian branch of the organization, Save the Children, wants world leaders to do more to streamline their processes for evacuating young people from Afghanistan. Danny Glenwright, the organization's president, says it's imperative that evacuation efforts are not hampered by bureaucratic red tape. All right, turning to election news now. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau promised yesterday that a re-elected Liberal government will spend billions in the coming years to hire more doctors and nurses. Mr. Trudeau says the Liberals would spend $3 billion over 4 years, starting in 2022, to hire 7,500 family doctors. There's also a tax and student loan incentive for health professionals who open offices in rural or remote communities. Well, this as the New Democrats are promising to be true environmental stewards by ending fossil fuel subsidies. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says the Liberals have been dragging their feet on the move to renewable energy sources. He pledged yesterday to end federal funds for fossil fuel enterprises. Mr. Singh says he'd relocate subsidies to oil and gas companies toward the clean, renewable energy sector. He's also promising to cut greenhouse gas emissions by more than half by the year 2030. Meanwhile, federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole is reaching out to working Canadians. He says he has the same goal as many union organizations: jobs for their members and strong economic futures for their families. Mr. O'Toole said yesterday that a Conservative government would require federally regulated employers with more than 1,000 employees or $100 million in annual revenue to include worker representation on their boards of directors. Statistics Canada says Canadians with the lowest credit rating repaid the most credit card debt in the first year of the pandemic. The agency reported overall non-mortgage debt fell by a record $20.6 billion from the start of the pandemic to January 2021. This includes a $16.6 billion drop in credit card debt as household incomes hit record levels. Mortgage debt, however, rose by a record $99.6 billion over the same time period. Residents in BC will soon need a vaccine card to enjoy restaurants, clubs, ticketed sporting events, and weddings. Premier John Horgan says he has been working with the Privacy Commissioner to ensure data on the virtual BC vaccine card is kept secure. The vaccine card comes as the Delta variant is causing a sharp uptick in cases in the province, and officials say the risk of infection is now 10 times higher among those who are unimmunized. Montreal will not be renewing the state of emergency that has been in place since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and instead it will switch to alert mode. The Quebec government has said that starting September 1st, Quebecers will need to show proof of vaccination to enter non-essential businesses such as bars and restaurants. Well, meanwhile, Manitoba will be getting a new premier on October 30th. This is when the governing Progressive Conservatives will choose a successor to Brian Pallister. The only person so far who has announced a plan to run for the leadership is former Health Minister Heather Stephenson, who has garnered the support of most Tory caucus members. The president of the Better Business Bureau in southern Alberta and East Kootenay, BC, is warning people to beware of scammers selling shipping containers. Mary O'Sullivan Anderson says the crooks are making false offers of containers for sale while posing as legitimate businesses. She says the scammers will typically pressure you for a deposit to secure the purchase of the container. The blazes that have scorched several parts of Western Canada have affected wildlife populations by incinerating their habitat, which may take many years to recover. Scientists are most worried about old-growth forests in fire areas, which are home to the Canada lynx, the marten, fishers, caribou, and the northern goshawk. A recall has been issued for the pork rind snack, Mr. Porky brand original scratchings. The recall covers 65-gram packages sold across the country with best before dates up to and including February 19, 2022. No illnesses have been reported, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency says the recall was triggered by a recall in another country. All right, up next, we take a look at housing affordability, inflation, and Canada's economic recovery. We'll have an interview with Mr. Aaron Wudrick, Director of Domestic Policy Program at the Macdonald Laurier Institute, coming up next. That and, of course, more news from around the world, only on Forum Daily, so stay tuned. We'll be right back after this break. As the federal parties continue to make promises during the second week of the election campaign, polling shows that housing affordability remains a top concern for many voters. Housing affordability is not only affecting potential homebuyers, but renters as well. According to recent polling by Nanos Research, 15% of Canadians surveyed said they were worried about whether they would be able to pay their housing costs in the next 30 days. Housing costs across the country have climbed during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is leaving many Canadians concerned for their future. This while inflation remains higher than the Bank of Canada's 2% target. Well, joining us now in studio is Mr. Aaron Wudrick, Director of the Domestic Policy Program at the Macdonald Laurier Institute. Aaron, great having you in person in studio today.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, let's talk about these big issues, Aaron. We've got housing affordability. Now, that's been a concern for a long time, but during the election campaign itself, it's a very big topic. So what are some of the major factors around rising housing costs in Canada?
Well, it's a good thing that it's a hot topic, Nima, because it's a growing issue of importance to many Canadians. Housing was expensive before the pandemic. The pandemic sort of turbocharged the housing market. And the reality is there's two broad issues with housing. There's a demand problem and a supply problem. And all of the attempts to fix the housing issue in this country really get down to one of those two issues. The other thing that I think causes housing to be a particular issue is that multiple levels of government are responsible for housing. You have municipalities, you have provinces, you have the federal government, and you need all three of those governments sort of rowing in the same direction if you hope to get anywhere. So, now housing is a hot topic in the campaigns, all the parties making very big promises. And I think the question that they're going to have to answer for Justin Trudeau is going to be, you've had 6 years. Why didn't you do anything about this until now? And as for the opposition parties, it's going to be, how are you going to succeed where the Liberals were not able to?
Now, considering we're in the second week of the campaign here, what do we know so far about the parties' platforms when it comes to housing affordability?
Well, we know that both the Liberals and the Conservatives are promising to increase supply a lot. The Conservatives, 1 million houses in 3 years, Liberals by 1.4 in 4 years, so quite a significant sum. It's not as big as you might think because about 280,000 houses are built every year in Canada already, so you're seeing a slight increase. But I think that's an analysis, an acknowledgement that supply is a big part of the problem. The other side is demand. It's tricky to try and help people who obviously need to buy a home to buy one without also dumping more money into the market and creating bidding wars and sort of overstimulating demand, which can also drive up prices. So, it's a challenging area. I don't think there's a magic bullet. But the fact that it has taken, front and center stage during this election, I think is probably a good sign.
All right, Aaron, let's jump to the inflation rate. We know the Bank of Canada said the recent spike is only temporary, but if this spike lasts longer than expected, how does that affect the next Canadian government coming in?
Well, it's an issue, obviously, not just for Canadian households, but for government. Government spends a lot of money. They have to provide services and buy things with that money. Your dollar does not go as far. Canadians are noticing that it's costing them more when they go to buy groceries. When they go to buy gas, when they take their family out for dinner. So it is creating a crunch. And this, if inflation continues to grow at this rate, that's going to put serious pressure on a government that is already spending more money than it's taking in.
All right, Aaron, just a little over a minute left here, but I want to jump to economic growth. We know that's a very high priority coming out of the pandemic. What sort of industries can Canada leverage for economic growth within the country?
Well, this is an age-old question. If it was easy to know, governments would always pick the winning horse. And I think we get into trouble when governments sort of tap an industry on the head and say, you're the one that's going to solve all our problems. But I think what we can do is look to the industries where we have already had an advantage. If you look at things like the resource sector, Canada is obviously a big provider of oil around the world. In spite of the fact, of course, climate change is a growing concern, oil is not going anywhere tomorrow, and people are still going to need that. And so if Canada is better at extracting oil, in a way that's more environmentally friendly than other countries, has tougher restrictions, higher standards, that's something I think that we can lean into and not just benefit the globe, but benefit ourselves economically. Also, agriculture is another area. And in spite of the image of an industry that is, sort of farmers in overalls, it's actually a very advanced area. There's a lot of advances in agricultural technology. Canada's a world leader in this. And of course, the world population is growing and people need to eat. So this is another area that I think policymakers need to really lean into.
All right, Aaron Wudrick from MLI, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thanks again for joining us today in studio.
A pleasure, thank you.
All right, stay with us as we take a closer look at a tweet labeled as manipulated media and the role that social media plays in elections. We'll have an interview with Dr. Christopher Schneider, social media expert and professor at Brandon University, coming up next, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Twitter flagged a tweet from Liberal candidate Chrystia Freeland yesterday and labeled it as manipulated media. The social media giant flagged the tweet after Ms. Freeland posted spliced-together clips of Conservative leader Erin O'Toole answering a question about private for-profit options in universal health coverage. The Tories are asking Elections Canada to investigate the tweet as a violation of the Canada Elections Act. They are arguing it materially misrepresents their position. Meanwhile, questions are emerging around the role social media plays during election campaigns and how platforms identify and handle misinformation. Well, joining us now to talk more on this is Dr. Christopher Schneider, social media expert and professor at Brandon University. Doctor, welcome to Forum Daily.
Hello.
Now, what is the context around this tweet by Chrystia Freeland that led it to being flagged by Twitter?
Well, the idea is the context of the tweet. It was a larger video clip that Freeland or her representatives had taken, and they spliced together. So they removed some of the statements, some of the remarks that O'Toole was making. It comes from a longer video clip, and then they put the video clip back together. I mean, Twitter allows you to share short video clips, so there might be numerous reasons why they edited it. Of course, they're being criticized for editing it to show O'Toole in an unflattering light. So they basically took out of context and then recontextualized it. The criticism is to advance the liberal agenda.
And has Twitter responded to any questions around the manipulated media label they gave that very tweet?
Twitter, as far as I am aware, has not responded to any questions regarding this particular circumstance. However, as you noted at the beginning of the segment, the Conservatives are asking or requesting an investigation be done by Elections Canada. But I think that if there is an investigation, that we probably, in all likelihood, will be hearing more about this, and quite possibly from Twitter.
And what do we know so far about how Twitter identifies if a tweet qualifies as manipulated media?
Well, the policy in question here is called the Synthetic and Manipulated Media Policy. It was introduced by Twitter in February of 2020. And there are three criteria in which Twitter uses to judge media content. This can include video, audio, text, so on and so forth. And the three criteria are as follows. The first is, has the content been significantly or deceptively altered? The second is, has the content been shared in a deceptive manner? And the third is, the content likely to cause public harm. Now, Twitter provides a typology of these criteria on its website. And more likely than not, content that is, might fulfill one of these criteria or two of the criteria will be labeled as deceptive media. Generally, if it fulfills all three of those criteria, Twitter will remove the content from its website.
And does this policy apply to other social media giants, or is there a universal law that applies to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter so that they can identify misleading posts? For misleading posts, no. The short answer is, regarding a universal law, if you will,
is all of the social media giants are bound by or restricted by legal jurisdictions in different countries, right? So Canada has laws say that the United States might not. For example, hate speech. So hate speech can't freely be shared in a Canadian context on any of the social media giants because it's subject to the Criminal Code of Canada. Now, regarding deceptive content and other rules that different social media platforms might institute, they're all individual according to each particular platform. There is no one universal standard in terms of how they govern the content on their respective social media platforms.
All right, Dr. Schneider, just about a minute left here, but do you have any recommendations for our viewers who may be wondering how to detect incorrect information or misinformation online?
I think part of it is just being critical about the things that you consume, and very importantly, the things that you consume that are within your worldview, right? So it's very easy when somebody posts or shares something that you disagree with for you to dismiss it. It's much more difficult, I think, in my opinion, for people to be critical about the things that are consistent with their worldview. So before you share things, kind of press pause, as it were. Have a look at what you're sharing and maybe investigate it. Make sure that the claims are factual and correct before you share information. And I think this will contribute to an overall better election cycle for all Canadians.
All right, Dr. Schneider, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
All right, stay tuned. We take a look at what's making news around the world after the break as the Taliban takeover leads to U.S. alarm over new terrorist threats. Meanwhile, Hong Kong prepares to amend a film censorship law, and Japan adopts a plan to release nuclear water from the Fukushima nuclear plant. These stories and more coming up next on the Forum Daily, so stay tuned. We'll be right back after the short break. The speedy Taliban takeover of Afghanistan has revived alarms about a resurgent al-Qaeda and new terrorism threats against the U.S. Experts are concerned that al-Qaeda could again be given unfettered safe harbor by the Taliban. The renewed attention to international terrorism comes as the U.S. is confronting a swell of national security threats from China, Russia, and closer to home, a surge in domestic violent extremism. The UN Human Rights Chief warned that she had received credible reports of severe abuses in areas under Taliban control in Afghanistan. Michelle Bachelet said Tuesday those include restrictions on women and summary executions of civilians and security forces who had laid down their arms. Ms. Bachelet urged the Human Rights Council to take bold and vigorous action to monitor the rights situation in Afghanistan. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris delivered a sharp rebuke to China for its incursions in the South China Sea. In a major foreign policy speech in Singapore, Ms. Harris laid out the Biden administration's vision for the Indo-Pacific. She says the U.S. will support its allies in the region against Beijing's repeated advances. The Biden administration is seeking to further solidify its pivot toward Asia. This while America's decades-long focus on the Middle East comes to a messy end with a chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. Meanwhile, U.S. military troops are flying around the clock and have managed their biggest day of airlifts out of Afghanistan so far. But the deadly violence blocking many desperate Afghans and foreigners from entering Kabul's airport persisted on Monday. Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid says his group will accept no extensions to the August 31st deadline. Hong Kong authorities say they plan to amend a film censorship law to forbid screenings of movies deemed contrary to national security. The proposed changes to Hong Kong's film censorship ordinance could step up censorship of movies in the semi-autonomous city. This would expand an ongoing crackdown on political dissent that has led to the closure of various pro-democracy organizations and the arrests of dozens of activists. Japan's government has adopted an interim plan that it hopes will win support from fishermen and other concerned groups. It aims for a planned release into the sea of treated but still radioactive water from the wrecked Fukushima nuclear plant. The government decided in April to start discharging the water into the Pacific Ocean in the spring of 2023. The idea has been fiercely opposed by fishermen, residents, and Japan's neighbors, including China and South Korea. The head of Iran's prison system has acknowledged that videos purportedly obtained by a self-described hacker group showing abuses at the Evin prison were real. Mohammed Mehdi Haj Mohammadi wrote on Twitter that he takes responsibility for the unacceptable behaviors. His comments come a day after the Associated Press published parts of the videos and reported about the abuse at the facility in northern Tehran. It is known for holding political prisoners and those with ties to the West, whom Iran uses as bargaining chips in international negotiations. Ukraine's president has urged closer ties with NATO and the European Union in a speech marking the 30th anniversary of Ukraine's independence. Ukraine celebrated its Independence Day on Tuesday with a military parade in the capital, Kiev. President Volodymyr Zelensky said that a strong Ukraine is a country that becomes NATO's enhanced opportunities partner and is supported by others when it applies to join the European Union. The anniversary comes amid heightened tensions between Ukraine and Russia. Official statistics show that Germany's economy grew by 1.6% between April and June compared with the previous quarter, a slightly better result than initially reported. The Federal Statistical Office said Tuesday that the gain followed a decline of 2% in the first quarter. Germany's central bank, the Bundesbank, said in its monthly report on Monday that it expects the economy to grow, quote, significantly more strongly over the summer as a result of loosened pandemic restrictions. A breed of gig apps tailored for short-term work is gaining popularity in the UK as well as in the US. Uncertainty about the durability of the recoveries and the tentative reopenings of businesses that are still threatened by COVID-19 has made flexibility a top priority for workers and employees alike. That has led the way for apps like Stint, InstaWork, and GigPro to help form an ultra-short-term worker-employee relationship, which is something that hasn't widely existed in recent decades. A Sri Lankan teen has created everything from a coconut picking machine to a coconut scraper. His latest invention is a solar-powered tuk-tuk. Suntara Lingam Pira Nawan's three-wheeled vehicle is made completely from recycled materials like second-hand frames, handles, and wheels sourced by his grandfather. Pira Nawan said the building process helped him relieve stress during the pandemic, and he hopes to be able to create a solar-powered car with his grandfather in the future. All right, that'll do it for your look at international and national news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on social media. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.